Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Hey, and welcome to the OT is In, where we delve into all things occupational therapy and education. I'm your host, Sarah Collins, and today we have a very special episode lined up for you. Joining us is Marianne Sunderland, a homeschooling parent, dyslexia advocate, and operator of Homeschooling with Dyslexia. Marianne is a mother of 8, 7 of whom are dyslexic, and she brings a wealth of knowledge and personal experience to our discussion. In this episode, we explore the fascinating journey Marianne has undertaken while homeschooling her children and the unique challenges and triumphs that come with teaching dyslexic kids. We'll discuss effective strategies like the use of assistive technology and the Orton-Gillingham approach, as well as the critical balance between accommodation and remediation. Marianne shares her insights on why listening to books can be beneficial, how reading development can surge around middle school, and the importance of continued reading practice beyond those early grades. Marianne also opens up about the strengths often found in dyslexic individuals, highlighting their storytelling abilities and entrepreneurial spirit. Plus, we touch on the practicalities of homeschooling, from transitioning to high school to leveraging community college resources. So whether you're a parent, educator, or simply interested in dyslexia and education, this episode offers invaluable tips and encouragement. So sit back, relax, and join us as we learn from Marianne's incredible journey and discover how to better support children with dyslexia. Hey, homeschool parents, I am so excited that you are here for the OT is In podcast. We just celebrated our 6-month anniversary, and hearing how this podcast has impacted your homeschool is such an honor. I want to be sure, though, that you know all the ways that I can support you through Homeschool OT. So we offer 3 fantastic services. First is community. This OT is In membership where you get weekly group coaching, a library full of helpful resources, access to a community of like-minded parents, a monthly book club, and a private question and answer session every 90 days. Another option is a private consultation. So this is personalized to dive into the nitty-gritty of your homeschool so that you can create customized strategies that fit your child's specific needs, with the goal that your homeschool is used to help your child to be successful in what they specifically need and want to do during the day now and in the future. And the third option are the classes. These are topic-based focus groups on critical areas like handwriting, sensory needs, and executive functioning. And all of this provides in-depth guidance on the why. So with Homeschool OT, the goal is that you understand, yes, that why and how to support your child. You don't just get advice. You get actionable solutions from me, a licensed OT, and a fellow homeschool mom. So visit homeschoolot.com to learn more. And thank you again for being here. All right, hey, and welcome back to the Occupational Therapy, the OT is In podcast. My name is Sarah Collins, and I've got with me here today Marianne, who I had the privilege of meeting this summer at the Special Needs Expo. That's what it was called. All of a sudden I blanked as to what it was called. But yeah, the Special Needs Expo, we both talked there, presented, and Marianne and I just had some really good conversations. So I wanted to make sure that you, my listeners, understood a little bit more about dyslexia. So, Marianne, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and who you are and how you got to be where you are as far as understanding and talking, presenting so much on dyslexia?
Sure. My name is Marianne Sunderland, and I have a website called Homeschooling with Dyslexia, which kind of started just as a hobby. I thought I'll start this blog, and I was blogging about homeschooling and large family. I have 8 kids, and it turns out that 7 of them are dyslexic. And so I started writing about that because it's quite an adventure or a
Yes.
journey, I should say, homeschooling kids who are smart, but for some reason aren't able to read and certain other things that they struggle with. And I just started sharing my journey of what I was doing, what was working, what wasn't working. I was really learning a lot. I was reading all the time. I got certified as a dyslexia, an Orton-Gillingham dyslexia tutor. And so anyway, there was a great need for that.
Yeah.
And it's something when in my early days of homeschooling my kids, I'm not dyslexic. My kid's dad is dyslexic and it's genetic, but I
Mhm.
didn't really understand it at all. And there are a lot of myths about dyslexia because our kids are smart. There's all kinds of misunderstandings, which we could go over later if you want to. But
Yes.
I had to learn about those things and learn about how my kids learned. And I noticed a lot of pitfalls, a lot of my own mindsets that were causing me to stumble, a lot of misinformation online, a lot of people trying to take advantage of
Mhm.
parents like me who reading is a tender subject. Like if our kids aren't reading, we're freaking out. And I just really strongly felt that I wanted to be a voice for parents to understand what dyslexia really is, what it really looks like homeschooling our kids. Because the bottom line is that it doesn't really look like traditional school, but it totally works. And our
Yeah.
now, 6 of my 7 dyslexic kids have graduated, and they're all doing really well, even though they learned on a completely different timetable. Most of them didn't go to college. You know what I'm saying? So,
Mhm. Mhm.
anyway, that's my story.
And so, how long have you been homeschooling?
I think this is my 28th year. I have 2
Amazing.
kids left, 17 and 14-year-old boys, both dyslexic, both remediated, very different learners. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So you're coming at this from you started just homeschooling and not just homeschooling. We all know that's a big deal, but started with homeschooling, then really became a self-made expert because you had to. And
Yeah.
then I've worked through this for years and years and years. So now you mentioned that there are people who prey on homeschool parents, especially if your kids are wired differently or are learning differently. And there is a lot of information out there about dyslexia. How do you specifically define dyslexia?
Dyslexia is actually a neurological issue. It's a processing issue. So it's not a vision issue. No, because a lot of times kids will transpose numbers. They'll write them backwards or upside down. And so it had been thought originally that maybe it
Yeah.
was a vision issue, but it's really not. It's back in the early 90s, Sally Shaywitz and her crew over, I think they're at Stanford, did a bunch of functional MRIs on the brains of good readers and not so good readers. And they found that with the dyslexic readers, that with the information would go in through their eyes, 20/20 vision, right? But the
Mhm.
processing of the information going from the eye to the reading center of the brain was very convoluted. It took a really wild path. Whereas the good readers, it just went boop straight to the reading path. And so they concluded that it was more of a processing issue than a physical vision issue. Certainly not an intelligence issue. And then what's so cool, and I got to just say this, over the years, researchers Brock and Fernette Eide, they have the Dyslexic Advantage website and their
Yeah.
book, The Dyslexic Advantage. They actually started to look at the strengths of dyslexia. So you have these people who don't process language efficiently, right? They're not super detail oriented, but they have these phenomenal big picture connected thinking, entrepreneurial, inventive skills. And so I just think that's amazing that actually, even though dyslexia does pretty dramatically affect your ability to learn to read, although everyone can learn to read, it just takes
Mhm.
time and the right
Mhm.
methods. There's a lot of other strengths that come along with it. And so I love that because our kids are smart,
Yes.
And we don't want to, I could go off on a tangent here, but homeschooling just really allows your kids to learn at their pace, the way
Right.
they learn without being defined by their weakness because they have a lot of strengths.
I know. You know what's interesting? My son and I were talking recently. Now, he does not have dyslexia, but he was a struggling reader for vision. And we are going to talk about that a little bit later. But I asked him, I was like, did you know that you struggled to learn to read? And he was like, no, like he didn't
Love
understand
it.
because he was
Mhm.
almost 9, but when he was really actually reading, but he didn't understand that in our current system, most people are learning to read way before that because we
Yeah.
were able to work at his own pace, which
Yeah.
you're right. It is such a huge thing. And to be able to pull on those advantages.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the advantages that you typically find with dyslexic kids?
So there's a variety of them. One is that interconnected thinking. So you'll find a lot of, they're able to maybe troubleshoot things. They see things from a different perspective, combining information from different fields, inventive thinking, entrepreneurial. For example, I have a couple kids that are entrepreneurs, 3. And one of them in particular, super profoundly dyslexic. Like I was super worried about him. I was like, I don't even know how you're going to succeed in life, which was a process of me coming out of that. You got to go to college to be successful.
Mhm.
And I'm like, okay, I've given that up. But he has this way of looking. So he's a lot of my family's in the boating business here. And he just had a way of seeing businesses and seeing customers and seeing the needs of boat owners and being able to create something that met the specific needs of this group of people and started a business doing that. And I said to him, I'm like, how did you know that? And he's, I have no idea. I don't
I
know.
don't
Like I
know.
just do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the kind of strengths that they have. Some are real, not, and they don't, not all dyslexics have the same
Right.
strengths, but narrative skills, like some are fantastic storytellers, which is ironic because, they
Mhm.
can, the spelling is always a huge issue for people with dyslexia, but really good mastery of language, story, communication. So those kinds of things.
So I love to start with what are the strengths before we talk about what are the signs and symptoms and
Hmm.
stuff, because I think there's so much fear that comes along with, wait, my child isn't reading, or wait, my child isn't writing, that we tend to get stuck in what is the
Yes.
problem or the issue. But guys, there are
Hmm.
so many positives
Hmm.
and ways if we're understanding how our kids' brains are working. And there is such a that acceptance piece of it. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to, expect that we are
Yeah.
going to continue to work through and that you can learn to read. So, what are some of the signs and symptoms when you would say, okay, yep, this is probably dyslexia? How do you know? You mentioned flipping letters earlier, which makes me giggle because that's what in the 90s when I was going through early college and stuff, I was like, yeah, totally. It's you flip your letters.
Well, it's interesting because having had 7 of my 8 kids have dyslexia, by the time my 7th kid with dyslexia came around, he was little and I was like, oh yeah, he's dyslexic. Just tell when he was little. But some of the signs when kids are younger is maybe learning to talk later, but not
Mhm.
necessarily. Difficulty learning the names of shapes and colors. Like they're smart, right? But they just
Right.
can't remember. Difficulty remembering letter sounds and names, reversing, so biscotti and things like that, like
Yeah.
saying words wrong. One of the really key signs that most kids early on have is an inability to reproduce rhyme. And so actually one of the best things you can do for a young kid, any kid really, is reading rhyming kinds of books, Dr. Seuss or whatever, and read them over and over. And then even pause and let them fill in. But
Mm,
being able to hear it, that's an issue of phonemic awareness, being aware of sounds and their place in words. So those are kinds of things when they're younger. Also, tying shoes is really difficult, telling
mhm.
time on a clock. As kids get older, prepositions like up and down. My little guy would say
Yeah.
down, down when he's lifting his arms for me to pick him up. Yesterday and tomorrow, before and after. Funny, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when they're starting to read, they may be able to remember the sounds and string together short words, but they struggle a lot with longer words. They struggle with little words like the, at, if, so, like they'll skip words. Always poor spelling. Always. So that's going to be very phonetic. I joke it's like the Chick-fil-A cow. That gets very phonetic. Like they remember the
Yeah.
basic sounds, but they can't remember unusual spellings. That's difficult. And spelling is often difficult well past reading. So they get to reading 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, maybe even on occasion older, but spelling will come later always. And then sometimes kids have difficulty with written expression. So getting the ideas out of their head onto paper, they might have a ton of great ideas, but putting them into words is difficult. Some kids have dysgraphia, which is difficulty with writing. So it's largely a processing issue. Just again, it's that language. Dyslexia is a language-based processing issue. So it's language in, language out also. So those are the kinds of things you'll see as kids are older. And then there's also a big correlation between dyslexia and ADHD. Maybe 40 to 60% of kids with dyslexia will also have ADHD, which is a whole other probably topic, a whole other podcast, but that's a whole other layer of learning difficulty for kids because it encompasses a lot of different things.
So then we pull in even more that you're needing to address and work through. Now, you mentioned that you're in an Orton-Gillingham, I don't know what the word is,
Dyslexia tutor.
tutor. There we go. I'm like,
reading tutor.
Orton-Gillingham, something. So can you explain a little bit more about that? And what does that look like within your homeschool? And how, if parents are looking for what to do in the situation, why that is a key.
That's a great question. Orton-Gillingham is a method or an approach to teaching reading that's multisensory, it's explicit, it's step-by-step, it's systematic. And it has been shown from early 1900s to be a really effective way of teaching people with dyslexia to read. And essentially at the very root of it is that it's multisensory. And the idea is that you're going through the eyes, you're going through the ears, and you're going through the senses so that it's affecting more areas of the brain and it's helping kids remember better. So multisensory learning is actually better across the board. But
you're speaking to my OT heart here.
Right. So now parents don't need to get certified as an Orton-Gillingham tutor though, because there's a handful of really good Orton-Gillingham based reading programs that are specifically designed for parents to use at home. So I can give you the link to that, an article or something on the different ones, but they're a little more cumbersome than maybe some other, and that's because they have the letter tiles. And so you're building the words, but once you get the hang of using those programs, they really are, kids like them.
Yeah.
You'll see the information sticking. And so I talk to parents a lot about teaching their kids to read. And it's basically teaching them at their pace, looking at yourself like a tutor. So anyone who has a tutor is struggling. It could be math, could be writing, could be reading. So you teach them some rules and they're practicing them each day. And then they forget them because our kids really do forget a lot. It just doesn't stick at first. And so you go back and review and just keep cycling through. And a lot of these programs have a lot of review built in. So that's what sets an Orton-Gillingham program apart from another reading program, is because there's a lot of beautiful programs out there and systematic ones or ones that look efficient or they come with your curriculum. But you necessarily need to review way more than you think you would. You need to use multisensory. So you're seeing it, you're hearing it, you're speaking it, writing it, all the things so that it's sticking. Orton-Gillingham really is the better way to go.
So when you say Orton-Gillingham, because there's some that are the writing is separate or spelling is separate from reading. There's some where it's put together. And we actually ended up using, again, my son's not dyslexic, but was struggling with reading. So we ended up using spelling first so that he could move and he could write and things, and he learned to read from his spelling. Is there a reason why some are separate and some are put together, or is it just the way that the curriculum is written?
So traditionally, Orton-Gillingham they do reading and spelling together, and you don't progress until you master both. There's one program that I know of that separates them, and that's all about reading and all about spelling. And actually, Marie Ripple, who started that company, her son was dyslexic, and she started with all about spelling. And he also learned to read from learning to spell. But the reason she separates it is because what I touched on earlier is that kids learn to read a lot sooner than they learn to spell. And the reason is, you can remember that E says
Right.
and EA says E and E consonant E says E. But when it comes to spelling, you're like, which one do I use?
Yeah. Then
And
have to
so,
just remember it and have that visual memory, which is not easy with dyslexia.
it's easier to decode than
Mhm.
it is to encode. And what I find is that once there's only so much space in the
Mhm.
brain, especially if a kid's got ADHD and there's focus issues. So there's only so much space. So they're processing decoding. And once they get really good at decoding, I see that the spelling can start to, there's room in the brain. So I often encourage parents with spelling, which is delayed, which can alarm people. They're just like, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
you can't spell, to really rely on assistive technology. Because the thing is, one of the goals with teaching kids with dyslexia is allowing them to work at their intellectual ability while supporting those weaknesses. And that comes through things like
Yes.
accommodation. So you're letting kids listen to books. I actually, at the beginning, was like, oh, you can't listen to books. That's cheating. Oh my gosh, this is so dumb. And so, of course, you want to let them listen to books because they get all the complex sentence structures and the vocabulary that they would be missing otherwise. Also, things like speech to text. As soon as they're curious about writing or creating something in that and with words, let them do that. Let them speak their papers. Some kids like to type. Some of my
Mhm.
using assistive technology like that requires a little trial and error because some of my kids preferred to write flashcards. Some preferred like a Quizlet, like an app.
Yeah.
Some preferred to listen to books. Some, it just depends.
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
some liked to use speech to text. Some like to type. So it just depends on your kid. But we really want to offer them that support because they will learn to read.
Yeah.
There's a kind of a phenomenon that I have seen with my kids, and other tutors have seen it with kids, and that is around the middle school years. It seems like the brain development kind of kicks in and they're better able to connect what they've been learning with their reading, and they take off. They have that saying
Yeah.
like the penny drops and they're just like,
Yeah.
oh, I can read this. I would say to all of a sudden my kids were reading it at 12 where it was like a struggle, and all of a sudden they were like, oh, I can read. I'm like, I don't know
Well,
how
that
that
makes
happened.
perfect sense because the frontal lobe development is there's a big burst in that around age 11 to 12, and that's where your working memory is, and all, so that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
And your
Yeah.
sustained attention, that's all in your frontal lobe. Yeah, fantastic. And I'm glad that it's almost like that just needs to come in to make sure for these kiddos that they're able to take in all this information, organize it, and then use it. So good.
Yes. Yeah, I still recommend that parents work at reading
Mhm.
with their kids. You might hear a statistic that if kids don't learn to read by third grade, they'll never catch up. And that
You're
is
so
based off,
angry.
that's based off public school kids who are
Yeah.
not getting the instruction that they need. But at home, you can continue to teach your kids. They're listening to books, they're speaking their papers, or they're narrating, which is just saying it out loud because who cares if it's
Right.
documented, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's my thinking, is just plug away at your practice,
Mhm.
and but don't stress about it.
Yes. And I love the way that you're talking about we want to accommodate and we want to remediate at the same time. Literally, these episodes will air separately, but right before this, I was literally recording about dysgraphia with Kelly, who is she's another occupational therapist, but works primarily with kids who are dysgraphic.
Okay.
And so much of what we're talking about, even in that situation, is that we want to, yes, be remediating, but also accommodating at the same time. If
Yeah.
there are ways that we can use assistive technology, but we don't throw out one or the other, we're
Mhm.
going to do them both because it's
Yeah.
important that kids are able to, people, not just kids, but able to take in the information and also to know that their words are important and that they are worthy of being out and on paper at the same time. I love this. In episodes 33 through 36, you'll be hearing about one of the most talked about occupations in the education field: literacy. Obviously, understanding the written word affects all other subjects as time goes on. You've likely heard terms like learning to read progresses to reading to learn. But we don't always think about how literacy affects math. Years ago, when we were going through vision therapy because my son was unable to visually track the letters on a page, I knew I needed to accommodate him in other subjects like science and history. We read and talked aloud for almost everything. But math curriculums were also an issue. Reading the problems on worksheets and workbooks were difficult, but reading word problems was absolutely impossible. And this is one of the reasons that we switched to CTC Math. For every problem, a person can click on the audio and hear the problem read aloud. Bonus, my son loved the Australian accent. So if your child needs the skills of reading separated from math, this is a great program for you. So visit ctcmath.com to check it out. So if you've been listening to this podcast for any amount of time, you know that I am a proponent of vision therapy. It worked fantastic for my own son, and I do vision clinics frequently within our town here in Pennsylvania. However, we also know that the eye muscles can absolutely impact reading. But when we're talking about dyslexia, there is this, wait, is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Do we do vision therapy? Do we not do vision therapy? So can you talk a bit more about this based on your research?
Sure. So way back when I first started homeschooling, and this was probably in 1997, 98, around there, vision therapy kind of came on the scene. And it was making its rounds through homeschool conferences and websites and things. And there was a little bit of misinformation saying that it would help with dyslexia, and people not understanding dyslexia not being a vision issue were latching onto that. And so now ophthalmologists and optometrists, I think it's ophthalmologists who do it,
Mhm.
are very clear for the most part that
Yes.
vision therapy is not a cure for dyslexia. In fact, there is no cure for
For
dyslexia
dyslexia.
because it is a brain wiring difference. However, the studies have shown that if you're using Orton-Gillingham, like a systematic reading program over the course of time, it does rewire the brain to be more
Mhm.
efficient with
Mhm.
reading. But as far as vision goes, because it's not a vision issue, it really is not going to help. However, you could have dyslexia and a visual tracking
Mhm.
issue, in which case some people will do remediation with Orton-Gillingham and then finish with vision therapy. I know plenty of people who have done vision therapy as well, and it has helped their kids.
Mhm.
I think the key is finding a reputable vision therapist that's not
That's not claiming
promoting
that
it as
you're,
if it's going to be
yeah.
a cure and is giving you good information.
Absolutely. And that's completely what you and I were talking about at the conference this summer. If there is an issue with eye muscle strengthening or with convergence or with visual scanning, that is going to impact you being able to take in the information into your brain, but it is not going to change the way that your brain is processing information. And
Right.
so it's almost like separating out the two, like we have to do with handwriting. We talk about, is this fine motor or is this your vision? There can be more than one component. So
Yeah.
it's, that detective work is such a key for parents to be doing.
Yeah.
So one thing to think about is, does this cross over into other occupations? I'm an occupational therapist, so I always think of that, of how you occupy your time. So
Hmm.
within vision, if you're seeing visual scanning or convergence issues with other areas, like for example, can your child track a ball or a frisbee when it's coming at them? My kiddo couldn't. It hit him right smack in the face with a big giant black eye, right?
Oh.
Yeah, not cute. Or is this something primarily with language, right? So
Mhm.
if it's language, then we want to gear more towards that direction. If there is a visual issue, sure, let's start there too
Yeah.
and work through. Wow. So besides Orton-Gillingham, what are some other things that you guys worked on within your home as you're helping your kids to learn through high school?
Through high school.
Mhm.
So with a lot of people are comfortable with a more relaxed homeschool in the younger years because
Mhm.
kids are so curious and they're always just learning anyway. And so you can do a little bit of reading, a little bit of math, a little bit of, read aloud and some,
Right.
hands-on science, and you're good to go. And then you get to high school and you're like, oh my gosh,
I
I have
have
all
time
these
to read that.
requirements. Be writing an essay and I've got
Uh-huh.
to be doing labs and doing higher
Right.
level math. And some, depending on the kid, some kids are fine with that. If you give them the right amount of accommodation and support,
Mhm.
they can cruise right on through that. Some kids, not so much. Some kids are delayed. And so I always start homeschool or high school with the idea of trying to keep them on track for 4-year school in case that's what they want to do.
Mhm.
Having a whole bunch of kids, I've always encouraged my kids to go to community college first.
Mhm.
And I got to tell you, I really am a huge proponent of community college, and I'll tell you why. One is a lot of times our kids struggle. How I talked about the middle school
Mhm.
magic. there's another boost that happens around 18 or 19 that I've noticed. So my kids who have maybe struggled in high school to keep up and
Mhm.
process all that information, they do a lot. Once they get to college and get moving, like the first couple of years, they really get strong with their writing and their math. So I
Yeah.
feel like there's another boost there. So community colleges often have, it's like not remedial, but they'll have introduction to college writing or introduction to college algebra. And so they're able to start, at a base level where
Mhm.
they're building some of these skills that maybe other kids have, areas of weakness. It's a
Mhm.
lot less expensive. They're
Yeah.
living at home. Kids
Goodness.
with
Yes.
kids with ADHD tend to be immature
Mhm.
emotionally and socially. And so for them, it gives them a couple more years to mature. So I try to start high school with the idea of obviously accommodating their learning needs because they might need assistive technology all
Mhm.
through high school, college, and adulthood. It just depends on the kid.
Right.
And then I modify as I go. Some of my kids, even my kid that's not dyslexic, didn't do well. No, she did all the 4-year stuff, but she ended up going to community college anyway, just because it
Mhm.
saves a lot of money. But
That makes me giggle. Were you, because only one of your kiddos was not dyslexic, right? So were you like,
right.
"I don't know how to teach you?"
It was so funny. I was like, "Do you want a workbook or something?"
I know. What do I do here?
Yeah, because I realized early on we're not doing workbooks because the kids don't like them. They can't
Yeah.
write. Things like explode the code I would do. Those are really good
Yeah.
practice. And I think that's how this kid actually learned to read. I would throw these explode the code books at her and she was 6 and she was reading Little House on the Prairie and she's, "Look, Mom, I can read." I was so upset, like at the contrast. Like I've
Yeah.
been working with these kids for 7 years to get them
Right.
to get to where you're at, and you just picked it up, and I was like, "That's what it's like." Like,
Wow.
I've spent
Right.
my whole kids' younger years just focused on reading.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
like
And you're like, "Little
anyway,
house on
yeah.
the
So
prairie." Oh,
there's a lot of flexibility in high school.
yeah.
And so I try to get, and talk way more about this on my site, but just I really try to accommodate, let them focus on their strengths. A lot of my kids ended up graduating early.
Mhm.
You can look at your state graduation requirements, and a lot of times they can graduate in 3 years. So a lot of my kids did that because they just really wanted to get out into the real world and
Yeah.
start
And start doing
working
their
or
thing.
start a career.
I love that so much. So, Marianne, you've mentioned your site a few times. So, how can people find you and all of your resources? Because I know and your book, which is on my shelf up here. I've read it twice.
I've actually written 3 books, so I don't know, are you
Oh,
talking
I
about
have the Dyslexia 101. Maybe I need to find the other one.
okay. Dyslexia 101 is a book. It's a quick start guide to
Yeah.
understanding dyslexia, and it has a lot about homeschooling. And then I have a kids book for parents to help explain dyslexia to their kids. And then I wrote a book uh, a year and a half ago called No More School. And and the subtitle is Meeting the Educational Needs of Kids with Dyslexia, because
Ah,
a lot of times for me, what I've experienced over the years is that I really needed to step pretty far outside the box of traditional education. But
mhm.
all of us being products of traditional education struggle with that. We want to
Yeah,
hop back
that's
inside. We
true.
don't feel comfortable outside the box. We're like,
Yeah.
but what if?
Mhm.
And so that book is deconstructs education and then allows us as individuals to put it back together and put together in education that really meets the needs of our kids. We look at what education is,
Yeah.
what dyslexia is, how they learn, what their strengths are, and then let's take the good and throw out the bad and let's add. So I love that
Ooh,
one because it
see?
really empowers, I think, parents
Yeah.
to
Mhm.
not be scared to give your
Right.
kids a different education, because all of our kids want to do well,
Mhm.
and they need confidence, which comes from feeling successful, right?
Yes.
Need to stay curious, which homeschooling is great for that because they have so much time. And
Right.
then that connection, that connection with the research of successful dyslexics showed that they asked them, what was the main thing? What was the biggest thing that was helped you be successful? And they said it was the presence of one caring adult, like whether it was a teacher or a family member that believed in them and advocated for them. So if you're homeschooling a kid that's struggling, you're already setting them up for success because you're believing in them, you're trying to figure things out. It's not always easy. And so my site is there to support parents. I have a newsletter that goes out at least once a week that just encourages. My site's homeschoolingwithdyslexia.com, and I have classes for parents that are like just quick. You can listen to it and get, what do you need to know about dyslexia? What do you need to know about teaching and reading, spelling, math? And I do have a mentoring group. You can hop in for a month. But that's, I joke, I'm like, this is for me because I still want to hop back inside the box of traditional education. And we encourage each other and lift each other up. So.
Yeah. In the Homeschool OT membership, we have a book club. So I think we're going to have to make sure that we read this next one and you can come in and chat with all the members.
That would be great.
About that. I would love to have you. It would be so good. Thank you so much, Marianne, for being here and for sharing your wisdom and especially from your time throughout all these years. I think there's so much to be said, yes, about your dyslexia information and what you've learned, but just to hear from a mom who has graduated 6 out of 8 kids, it's so beautiful. So wonderful to hear. Yeah. Thank you so much.
If I can do it, you can do it. That's for sure.
There we go. We'll see. All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.